Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to Korean Atlanta Mentorship. And so, what we're going to talk about is life lessons from the bank. So, this is the third video in a series of videos that we call Life Lessons from the Bank. So, by observing the institution of banking, there's so many things that we can learn. Now, nobody from the bank actually came to my house to mentor me. There was no Mr. Miyagi from The Karate Kid or Mr. Feeney. You guys remember Mr. Feeney from Boy Meets World? Or who else? Wilson from Home Improvement. Like, there was no mentor who came to my house to tell me these are life lessons from the bank that you can learn. No, you just observe and go, it's very interesting. And probably people at the bank themselves don't know this because they just go to work and they're probably all decompartmentalized and they just kind of go home and they don't know what's up, right? But you'll notice that they have the tallest buildings in every downtown in America. And they don't produce a product like an iPhone or Nintendo Switch. And so there's a lot to learn just by observing. And one of the things that I came to learn is that they don't do business with poor people, right? They don't do business with poor people. And it's like, that's kind of opposite of what I was taught because I was taught like, hey, I should, like spend all my energy and effort to work with poor people or something like that. I'm in your typical college essay where it's like, oh, I volunteered in, I don't know, the inner city and work with poor people. And, I went abroad in this country and built a well. And I think one of the reasons why young people suffer so much is because they're not taught to work with rich people, right? You ever notice like you see all these TikToks nowadays where it's like I'm frustrated, I'm angry, I'm devoting my life to kids or whatever, and then they look like they're going to be on the brink of tears. It's probably because those people were taught to work with people who don't have money. If you know anything about banks, they don't lend money to people who need it, right? And so this is kind of related to what I'm talking about right now, which is don't do business with poor people. Now, whether that's morally right or wrong, I kind of think of it in the way that airplanes teach you about safety. So if you go onto an airplane, they usually teach you, oh, if there's a disturbance, and pray you're not on a Boeing plane. But if there's like a air turbulence or disturbance, and the mask comes down, they tell you put your mask on first on you before your child. And the whole theory is that you can't help your children unless you yourself, right? You yourself are in a position to help them. And that's the same with the thing I think about poor people. I can't help them unless I make some money myself. And the easiest way to make money is to sell to rich people because it's kind of like they have the money, right? Who has money? Poor people or rich people? All rich people. So if the banks who have all the money in the world are not like immune to this principle, right? They can't just go out and say, "Hey, we're going to make loans to poor people." We only work with rich people because in order for us to survive, that's what we got to do. Because again, banks don't lend money to people who need it. Then what makes you think, as a little tiny old individual, that you'll be able to become rich by serving poor people, right? So my philosophy is make the money first by serving the rich people, and then if you want to serve the poor people or do business with them, do it at that time. But if you're, let's say, 18 or 19 and you're coming up in life or you just graduated college and you're wondering why everything is so hard, it's probably because you were brainwashed to think that you should just devote your life to serving poor people, right? That's probably what happened. And I think somewhere in the back of my mind that's what happened too. You know what's really crazy? I'll tell you what's really crazy. The people who have praised me the most are like these really big international corporations and that I've always thought were evil. They're always like, "Oh my goodness, you are awesome. You are the best." And then individuals, like random individuals that I meet that I really want to help and serve, always tell me that I don't know what I'm talking about. It is the craziest thing. And if I had known that from the very beginning, I would have never ever even tried to help random Joe or Jane until I made money, right? Like I think that was my big mistake in life is that I try to help random, you ever have like random individuals you try to help, whether but if you help large institutions and big companies or people who have a lot of money, you're not going to be on the struggle bus. It's kind of like you explaining velocity banking to your cousin rather than, to the president of the bank. I've heard people say they've actually explained velocity banking to vice presidents, and they were like really receptive and blown away by it, right? Whereas, to your random individual, and this has certainly happened to me, they just kind of stare at you and they don't care, right? So just to reiterate, okay, today's life lesson today is don't do business with poor people. And again, people have been observing banks a long time, and look at this article from the New Yorker where it says the high cost for the poor of using a bank. This is from 2013, right? 2013. They probably knew this like 100 years ago and probably have articles like this, right? So let's just read a little bit of it again from the New Yorker. In September, I attended a meeting on how to help low income people get better access to financial services. I found myself sitting next to an executive from a large financial services firm who told me that he recently pretended to be without a bank account for an entire afternoon. Entire afternoon. I love it. This part makes me laugh where it's like, I'm a really rich person, a executive from a large financial services firm, and I'm going to pretend to be poor for like an entire afternoon. Oh, gee, like, you know. So I would not do that, but let's just keep reading. He and several people in his department had been sent to check cashing stores in places like Harlem to cash checks, send money, and pay bills to experience what it might be like to live without a bank account. He became animated as he pulled a file from his briefcase and showed me the stack of receipts he had accumulated in his afternoon of living on the edge. He was outraged by how much it cost to send money from Manhattan to Brooklyn. He had been forced to spend an extra $150 to pay a bill. He had ended his day puzzled about why anyone would use check cashing services instead of banks, right? So really interesting, and I'm assuming that when he says large financial services firm, I'm going to assume it's a bank. But isn't it funny how people, even in the executive positions of the bank, don't even know like how the bank works? It's like, why would you do a check cashing, work at a check cashing place instead of a bank? Well, it's because the bank doesn't do business with poor people, right? The bank does not do business with poor people. And here's a crazy thing, right? So I don't know if you know the three credit bureaus like the TransUnion, Equifax, and what's the other one? Experian. Did you know that banks actually pay them to report to them? Right? Isn't that crazy? Because they have a whole infrastructure that they're willing to pay people or pay institutions or those companies to report if you pay your bills or not. And the whole point of it is that they want this infrastructure to make sure that they don't have to deal with poor people or people who don't pay their bills, right? It's like me lending you $1,000. Okay, I lend you $1,000, and I'm paying, let's say, $5 to Experian to report whether you've made your monthly payment or not. That's the length that they're willing to go to not deal with poor people, okay, or people who don't have money. So some of you, I know I see your comments on these velocity banking videos where it's like, well, who's going to have a line of credit available, to use like that? And that's because you don't understand that banks don't lend to people who don't have money, right? Banks only lend to people who don't need their money, right? That's their business model, and they'll do anything, even create this whole infrastructure or participate in this whole infrastructure to make sure that you're credit worthy, and they'll actually pay into it to make sure that they don't have to deal with poor people. Isn't that crazy? So if they're willing to go through that length to not deal with poor people, maybe you got to put a little bit more effort into make sure that you do business with rich people, right? That's how you become rich. You don't get rich dealing with poor people unless you're like Walmart or you're a subprime auto loan dealer, right? So something to think about. But life lesson from the bank: banks don't do business with poor people, and you probably shouldn't either. At least in the beginning, when you're starting out, right? And again, how do I make money? By not doing business with poor people. It doesn't mean you can't be friends with them. It doesn't mean you can't hang out with them. It just means you just don't do business with them in the beginning. And then, once you have some money, then you try to do business with them and then you get burned like Goldman Sachs and the Apple Card. You know what I'm saying? And you don't know what I'm talking about, look up Goldman Sachs and the Apple Card. All right. Well, this is Karina Lanta Mentorship. Have a great day, everybody. Happy Friday, and we will speak next time.